This is Denari Pledge Segmenter Part 2. We're continuing our discussion of the filters available to us in Pledge Segmenter. We're going to continue by clicking the Statistics section here and expanding that. All of these are based on the statistics related to pledges that Denari calculates. The first one is the fulfillment rate. Fulfillment rate is the total amount pledged minus the paid so far, expressed as a percentage. In other words, Denari takes that difference and displays that as a percentage. And so you can filter on that and say, give me any pledge that is more than 50% filled, or less than 50% filled, or less than 80% filled, whatever is appropriate. However, you should note that since this is based on the total amount pledged field, that total amount pledged field is also in turn based on the stop date of a pledge. So in other words, if you have a stop date, Denari can calculate the number of payments. Let's say it's a monthly pledge and you have a stop date that is exactly 12 months from the start date. Denari is then able to take the payment amount, let's say it's $50 times 12, and calculate a total amount pledged, which in this case would be $600, and then from that be able to calculate the fulfillment rate. However, if you don't use a stop date in your pledges, then Denari doesn't know how many periods or how many payments are going to be made. So it's going to say, hey, $50 times what? It really doesn't know what that amount is. And so the total amount pledged is never completely accurate. Total amount pledged then at that point is based on the number of payments from the start date that Denari knows for sure are due. So fulfillment rate becomes somewhat irrelevant at that point. So it's good to note that there's kind of a catch-22 with that stop date. Paid through date calculates the date that the pledge has been paid through. So in other words, if we're 2 months into the pledge and the person has made one payment, then the paid through date has a date, one date prior to the rollover date or of the next payment, or when the next payment is due. And by the way, the rollover date is the anniversary of the start date of the pledge. So in other words, if the pledge starts on the 1st of a month, then the second payment becomes due on the 1st of the next month, and the third payment on the 1st of the following month, and so forth. So it rolls over, the next payment becomes due. And so the paid through date would be calculated up to the point that the pledge is going to roll over and the next one is due. So if the person had made three months worth of payments at one time, let's say, then their paid through date would be off in the future. And you can use that field to calculate where people are at in their pledge, whether they're ahead or behind, although there's other ways to do that as well, which we'll discuss here in a moment. The next payment date is when the next one's going to be due. So this will help you if you want to find how much money you can expect to come in from your pledges next month, or some date next month. We can say, give us a list of all the pledges that have a next payment date of June 15th, or between June 15th and June 30th, or something like that. Due so far, you have to look at that label, due so far, and take it literally. It is not the amount due, it is the amount that is due so far. So in other words, if we have a $50 a month pledge and we're 2 months into that pledge, then the due so far is $100, and that is totally irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the amount of money that has been paid at this point. It is simply saying, as of this point, this donor should have paid this much money on this pledge. Now, paid so far is just that. It's how much money has been paid. And then the ahead behind here, this column, expresses the difference between due so far and paid so far as a negative number. So in other words, we're saying, okay, at this point they should have paid $100, but they've actually paid $50, so the ahead behind is a negative 50. Now this is the field that gets used most often to determine which pledges are behind, or which pledges are ahead for that matter. But you have to use this field, you have to go back to math class in high school. Remember your number line. Anything left of 0 is a negative number on the number line. And so we're saying anything that is negative is behind in its pledge. And so again, if we wanted to find anybody that is behind, we could choose less than as our operator and then put 0 in the low value field. So that means that any pledge that the total of its head, basically the head behind field is a negative number, or any pledge that the number is left of 0 is behind. And we could use this field in different ways, but that's how it most often gets used. Remaining does the same thing. It compares due so far and paid so far, but it expresses the output as a positive number, and sometimes it's helpful to be able to determine that as well. Total pledge again uses the total pledge based on the start and stop date. So just like with fulfillment rate, if you're not using stop dates, then total pledged is somewhat irrelevant or difficult to use. So it's just basically going to add up, and say, give us anybody whose total pledge is more than 1,000, more than 5,000, less than whatever, however you want to use that. But again, it's based on the start and stop. Pledge balance is the total pledge minus the paid so far. So that then says, okay, the total pledge is $1,000 and they've paid $500 so far, so the balance then is $500. So once again, this pledge balance field only works if you're using stop dates for your pledges, because it's based on this total pledge field. Days past due, again, is based on that number line. So if you can picture that, we want to get anybody, let's say for example, who is more than 60 days behind. We do that by saying, give us anybody whose days behind, which are expressed as a negative number if they are in fact behind, if their days behind is to the left of minus 60. So in other words, if you're going down that number line to the left of 0, you're going to come to a minus 60. We want anything that's beyond that minus 60 off to the left. So to get the days behind here, we would say less than minus 60. So that's going to give us anything less than or off to the left of minus 60 on the number line. And again, this is a really helpful field because a lot of folks like to send pledge statements out to people who are seriously behind, and that might be minus 60 or 90 days or 100 days or whatever it is. But this is a little bit backwards in that intuitively you'd say we want anybody who's more than 60 days behind. You're going to use more than as the operator here. But you have to kind of reverse that again. If you can picture that number line, we want to be off to the left of minus 60. So those are all the filters that are available for pledge segmenter. Let's take a quick look at this output. Again, we talked about the fact that we can use the Excel spreadsheet here as our output. When we run this, we get a pretty large spreadsheet that includes a lot of information. It does include the donor's name and address information, because at this point the name and address information of the donor is really a characteristic of the pledge. It's who gave the pledge, so that information will be included. But again, we're getting a list of pledges here, so it's important to remember that we're going to get those people who have multiple pledges are going to show up in this output more than once. Okay, let's stop there. In part 3, we're going to discuss other output options for pledge segmenter.